Tonight we enter a world where gods and mortals once walked the same earth, not as distant symbols carved into stone, but as living powers believed to breathe above the reed beds, command the rivers, darken the sky, and decide the measure of every human life, across the scorched plains of southern Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates bend through a land of silt, salt, heat, and shimmering distance. Men and women pressed marks into wet clay. These marks were small. A wedge here, a stroke there, a patient ordering of signs made by a reed stylus in the hand of a trained scribe. Yet from these quiet impressions emerged one of the loudest voices in human history. The Sumerian tablets do not speak easily. They are broken, buried, burned, scattered, and often incomplete. Some were found in temple stores, some in palace archives. Some lay beneath fallen walls, sealed in layers of dust for more than 4,000 years, through stratigraphic excavation, radiocarbon dating of surrounding organic remains, comparative linguistic study, and the slow discipline of cuneiform decipherment. Scholars have drawn these fragments back into the light. The British Museum, the University of Pennsylvania, the Louvre, and institutions across Iraq and Europe now preserve thousands of these clay witnesses, each one a hardened moment from the dawn of writing. And what they reveal is not simple. They reveal a civilization of canals, granaries, fields, oxen, priests, kings, merchants, mourners, singers, brewers, soldiers, and astronomers. But they also reveal a far stranger landscape, one in which the gods were not gentle abstractions. The gods demanded food, they required houses, they owned cities, they received labour, they were praised, feared, bribed, mourned, and blamed. In the oldest stories, humanity did not rise proudly as master of creation. Humanity was fashioned for service. Here begins the great unease, for among the mythic traditions of Mesopotamia, there are stories in which human beings are created because the gods themselves grow tired of work. The lesser divine powers dig canals, carry baskets, and maintain the cosmic estates of heaven and earth. Their labour becomes unbearable. Their complaint rises like dust in the throat of the universe. The divine order trembles. A solution is proposed. A new creature will be made, mortal, fragile, clever, and doomed. A being who can carry the burden. Man, woman, the worker of the gods. To modern ears, this sounds like theology, myth, perhaps poetry. But to the ancient Sumerian imagination, such stories explain the deeper structure of reality. Why do humans toil beneath the sun? Why must fields be irrigated? Why must temples be fed? Why must kings kneel before statues? Why does the world seem arranged as service, hierarchy, sacrifice, and debt? The answer lay in clay, chant, and ritual memory. People laboured because, in the beginning, labour had been transferred from heaven to earth. Yet the tablets do not leave humanity in silence. They preserve hints of strain between the divine and the mortal. Humans become numerous. Their cities swell. Their voices rise. Their offerings multiply. But so do their disturbances. The gods, in some traditions, are troubled by the noise of mankind. Sleep is broken. Order is strained. The divine assembly turns against the very creatures made to serve it. Here, the forgotten war begins, not always as a war of bronze spear against flaming sword, but as a conflict of purpose. The gods desire obedience, quiet, and order. Humans bring expansion, memory, hunger, grief, and sound. They build cities that gleam with whitewashed walls. They sing in courtyards. They bargain in markets. They bury their dead with care. They lift their eyes toward heaven and ask questions that may never have been welcome. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. No single tablet says, plainly and completely, that mankind marched in battle lines against the gods. Ancient myth rarely speaks in the clean language of modern history. Instead, it gives us fragments, a rebellion among divine labourers, a creation of humans as replacements, a flood sent to destroy noisy mankind, a chosen survivor warned by a merciful God, a world drowned beneath judgment, a civilization reborn under renewed fear. These are not ordinary legends. They are the deep architecture of ancient thought, where social memory, environmental terror, ritual obedience, and political power are fused into story. In the ruins of Sumer, every brick seems to know this tension. Imagine the city of Uruk at dusk. The air is warm and heavy. The canal water carries the smell of mud, fish, reeds, and animals. Workers return from the fields with aching backs. At the temple precinct, lamps begin to flicker. The great sacred platform rises above the houses, its edges catching the last red light of evening. Somewhere, a scribe sits with a tablet on his lap, shaping signs that will outlive kings. Somewhere, a priest washes the statue of a god as though tending a royal body. Somewhere, a child hears that the world was once nearly ended by divine rage. The clay archive is not just literature. It is a door into a mind world where civilization itself was dangerous, where the very success of human society could provoke the heavens. The more humans built, the more they resembled powers they were never meant to rival. The more they organized, counted, stored, and commanded, the more they pressed against the boundaries set by myth. Archaeology gives us the material bones of this world. Lithic analysis reveals older tools and continuities from prehistoric lifeways. Ceramic sequences trace changing habits of storage, cooking, and trade. Genomic data opens dim corridors into population movement and ancestry. Stratigraphic excavation shows cities rising, burning, flooding, rebuilding. But the texts give us something still more haunting. They show how ancient people understood their place beneath eternity. They did not think themselves primitive. They were not children of the human story. They were philosophers of mud, brick, and starlight, observers of famine and flood, makers of law, measure, song, and lamentation. They knew the terror of dependence. They knew that rivers could nourish or destroy. They knew rulers could protect or devour. They knew that power often arrives dressed as holiness. The forgotten war between gods and humans is therefore not merely a tale of supernatural violence. It is the earliest drama of authority. It asks who owns human labour. It asks whether life is service or freedom. It asks why suffering is built into the order of things. It asks why the divine, if divine it truly is, should fear the noise of the living. And so the tablets begin to speak, not loudly, not clearly, but from beneath the weight of collapsed cities and centuries of dust. They whisper of a time when heaven looked down upon the earth and mankind looked back. So Kaya, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as we settle into the ancient dark together, tell us where you're watching from and what the local time is in your corner of the world. Beneath the flat brown distances of southern Iraq, beneath wind-blown dust and the pale crust of salt left by vanished waters, the cities of Sumer sleep in layers. They do not rise from the earth as marble ruins, white and clean against a blue Mediterranean sky. They are not crowned with columns. They do not announce themselves with triumphal arches or paved roads of imperial stone. The first cities of Mesopotamia are quieter, more fragile, and in some ways more mysterious. Their bones are mud. Their towers were made from sun-dried brick. Their walls return slowly to the soil that made them. A palace, a shrine, a courtyard, a bakery, a scribal room, a burial pit. All could soften with rain, collapse with time, and become part of the same swelling mound. To the eye of a traveller, such a mound might appear almost natural. A low hill on the plain, a rise where goats wander, a place where pottery shards glitter after storms. Yet to the archaeologist, these mounds are not hills. They are accumulated human time. Each layer is a vanished street. Each band of ash is a day of destruction. Each floor laid upon another floor is a decision made by people who believed the sacred centre of their world could not simply be abandoned. Here, stratigraphic excavation becomes a kind of descent through memory. The spade removes soil, but the mind travels backward. A late wall gives way to an older wall. A rubbish pit cuts through a forgotten room. A child's burial lies beneath a domestic floor. A seal impression emerges from packed earth, carrying the image of a procession, an animal, a worshipper, a god whose name may have been spoken with trembling care. The past is not found all at once. It appears in patient increments, in measured squares, in careful drawings, in numbered bags of pottery, bone, charcoal, clay, shell, and stone. The city of Uruk, among the greatest of these ancient places, stands like a giant shadow at the beginning of urban history. Its ancient name became bound to kingship, writing, temple power, and mythic memory. There, on the wide alluvial plain, people gathered in numbers never seen before. Houses multiplied, workshops grew, temples rose upon platforms, labour became organised at a scale that reshaped the horizon. Clay tablets began to carry accounts of grain, sheep, beer, cloth, labourers, and offerings. Writing, in its earliest form, was not born as poetry, but as administration. The gods needed counting, the temple needed memory. This is one of the great ironies of civilization. The first written signs do not begin with a lover's confession, a king's boast, or a philosopher's question. They begin with quantities, measures, lists, rations, animals, containers, work teams. The soft clay tablet became the mind of the institution. It remembered what no single human memory could safely hold. It gave permanence to obligation. It turned labour into record. Further south brings a different kind of grandeur. Its later royal tombs, deep and haunting, revealed gold, lapis, silver, musical instruments, weapons, ornaments, and the remains of attendants buried with terrifying ceremony. But beneath the splendour lies an older truth. Was not merely a city of kings. It was a port of the lower Mesopotamian world, tied to waterways, trade routes, marshlands, distant stones, timber, metals, and shells. In a land where stone was scarce, and good wood had to travel from afar. Every imported object tells of contact. The plain may look empty, but the cities were never isolated. They breathed through exchange. Eridu, remembered in tradition as one of the earlier cities, carries the aura of deep beginnings. Its temples appear in successive building phases, each constructed over the year last, each preserving the sacred importance of the place. The earliest shrine is modest when compared with later monumental architecture, yet its repeated rebuilding suggests something profound. A holy place could grow, but its location mattered. The divine presence was not easily moved. The sacred had a geography. Earth itself could become marked by ritual memory. Nippur, inland and revered, offers another kind of power. It was not always the strongest political city, but it held immense religious authority. Its great temple precinct was associated with divine kingship and cosmic legitimacy. Kings who controlled Nippur could claim favour from the highest powers of the Sumerian world. In the dust of Nippur, archaeologists recovered immense numbers of tablets, including school texts, literary compositions, lexical lists, hymns, myths, and administrative records. A city could rule by armies, but it could also rule by holiness, tradition, and the written word. The excavation histories of these sites are themselves chapters of human obsession. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, explorers, diplomats, local workers, antiquarians, and scholars entered the mounds with ambitions shaped by empire, scripture, curiosity, and competition. Some dug too quickly, Some damaged what they did not understand. Some removed treasures while leaving behind the quieter evidence of daily life. Yet even through imperfect beginnings, the clay endured. Tablets survived because fire, the destroyer of wood and reed, could harden them. A burned archive could become immortal. This is why the lost war between gods and humans must be approached through both earth and text. The tablets speak in mythic images, but the cities show the social world that gave those images force. A myth of divine labour makes deeper sense in a land where canals had to be cleared, fields measured, bricks moulded, reeds cut, animals counted, and grain moved under fierce heat. A story about gods disturbed by human noise belongs naturally to a world where urban density itself was new, startling, and perhaps frightening. The first cities were miracles, but they were also machines of pressure. Imagine a work crew at sunrise near the banks of the Euphrates. Bare feet sink into damp mud. Reed baskets scrape against shoulders. Overseers call out assignments. Donkeys bray. Water glints in irrigation channels. The smell of wet clay rises as bricks are shaped and set in rows beneath the sun. In the distance, a temple platform glows faintly in morning light. Its presence dominates the settlement, not merely as architecture, but as command. The city belongs to the god. The fields belong to the god. The storehouses belong to the god. Human hands move through a world already claimed. Archaeology reveals no single moment when the gods declared war on humankind. Instead, it reveals the conditions under which such a story could feel true. It reveals population growth, intensified agriculture, temple economies, craft specialization, long-distance trade, social hierarchy, and the birth of record-keeping. It reveals that human beings had entered a new arrangement with power. They had built the city, and the city now demanded them. Still, secrets remain hidden beneath the mounds. Many tablets lie unread. Many sites remain only partly explored. Many layers have been lost to erosion, looting, groundwater, conflict, and time. What survives is vast, yet incomplete. The ancient plain gives answers slowly, as though reluctant to surrender the voices placed within it, and so the mud-brick cities stand at the edge of memory, half ruined, half eternal. They are not dead places, they are sleeping witnesses in their floors, walls, drains, graves, hearths, and archives. The first urban people left the evidence of a world where the divine was not distant. Labour was sacred, and the city itself became the battlefield upon which human destiny was measured. When the Sumerians looked upon the world, they did not see empty matter. They saw ownership. The sky was not simply sky. It was a vast and terrible height, a realm of command, storm, light, omen, and divine movement. The earth was not merely earth, it was the broad body of fertility, burial, boundary, and harvest. The rivers were not only channels of water, they were forces of blessing and threat, swelling at the wrong season, retreating when most needed, carrying silt, fish, reeds, boats, corpses, and rumours from distant settlements. Every field, every canal, every temple storehouse, every sheepfold and threshing floor existed within a sacred economy. The gods owned the world. This idea was not decoration placed upon life. It was the framework through which life was understood. A city did not belong first to its inhabitants. It belonged to its divine patron. The temple was not only a place of prayer, it was the house of a god. Within its walls, the deity was fed, clothed, washed, honoured, sung to, and presented with offerings as a living sovereign. The divine statue was treated not as an artistic object, but as a presence. It could receive meals. It could travel in procession. It could hear petitions. It could become angry. It could abandon a city. In this world, Religion was not separate from government, agriculture, law, or labour. There was no quiet, modern category called belief, sealed away inside the private mind. The sacred entered the grain ration, the ploughed field, the weaving room, the brewer's jar, the oath in court, the foundation brick, the king's title, the lullaby sung in a courtyard at night. To live in Sumer was to move through a landscape thick with obligation. The temple estate stood at the heart of this arrangement. It possessed land, animals, tools, storage rooms, workshops, and labourers. Grain moved into its granaries, beer was brewed for its dependents, wool was transformed into cloth, herds were counted, offerings were prepared, scribes recorded deliveries, deficits, names, and measures. The divine household was vast, and its appetite was daily. It needed bread, beer, dates, fish, oil, milk, meat, incense, garments, vessels, furniture, and song. To serve the gods was therefore not only to kneel in reverence, it was to dig, carry, weave, bake, irrigate, harvest, slaughter, clean, count, and obey. Here the ancient mythic imagination becomes painfully concrete. When later stories say that humans were made to bear the labour of the gods, those words arise from a society in which labour was visibly organised for divine institutions. The theological claim and the economic system mirrored one another. The gods stood above, the temple administered, the scribes measured, the workers fulfilled. Clay tablets gave this order a durable memory. Yet it would be too simple to imagine the people of Sumer as passive victims of religion. They were not fools trembling in ignorance before painted idols. They were subtle observers of power, nature, and dependence. They understood that human life required cooperation with forces greater than the individual. The farmer depended on water he did not create. The city depended on harvests it could not fully guarantee. The king depended on legitimacy he could not manufacture by strength alone. The community depended on ritual, rhythm, storage, and trust. The gods made sense of this fragility. A poor harvest was never only a poor harvest. It might signal divine displeasure, ritual failure, broken order, neglected offerings, or a cosmic imbalance. A military defeat was not merely tactical weakness. It could mean that the city's god had withdrawn protection. A plague was not only disease, it was a sign that unseen powers had entered the streets. In such a universe, the human task was not to dominate nature, but to maintain relationship. The divine world itself was imagined as hierarchical and political. The gods had ranks, offices, houses, families, rivalries, tempers, councils, and domains. They were magnificent, but not always peaceful. They could desire, argue, deceive, grieve, punish, and regret. Their society resembled human society enlarged into cosmic scale. This resemblance is crucial. The Sumerians did not picture divinity as a distant perfection beyond thought. They imagined power through the structures they knew most intimately: household, city, court, field, and throne. At the summit stood great deities associated with sky, air, earth, water, love, war, wisdom, moon, sun, and the underworld. But beneath these towering powers existed a crowded sacred population attendants. Lesser gods, protective spirits, demons, divine messengers, and ancestral presences. The unseen world pressed closely upon the visible one. It gathered at thresholds. It moved through dreams. It spoke in omens. It entered illness. It guarded doorways. It haunted deserts and marshes. It watched the king. The king himself occupied a dangerous middle ground. He was not merely a political ruler. He was a servant chosen by the gods, a shepherd appointed over people, a builder of temples, a restorer of canals, a maker of justice, a warrior who acted under divine favour. His inscriptions proclaim humility and greatness in the same breath. He bows before heaven, then commands earth. He claims not to own the city absolutely, yet he mobilizes its bodies and wealth. He is the steward of divine property, which gives him immense human power. This arrangement could bind a community together, but it could also sharpen inequality. When the gods own the fields, those who speak for the gods wield extraordinary influence. When offerings are required, someone must produce them. When temple accounts record labour, names become numbers. When divine favour justifies kingship, rebellion becomes not merely political disobedience, but an offence against the cosmic order. And yet the tablets preserve laments, prayers, and complaints that show human beings wrestling with this world. They plead with gods who seem silent. They mourn destroyed cities. They wonder why suffering falls upon the innocent. They praise divine mercy while fearing divine rage. Their voices are dignified, intelligent, and wounded. They do not blindly accept the universe. They negotiate with it through ritual, poetry, and memory. The idea that gods owned the earth gave meaning to every harvest and terror to every disaster. It explained why temples rose above cities like mountains of command. It explained why men and women carried baskets in the heat for powers they could not see directly. It explained why clay tablets counted grain with such severity. It explained why human noise, human hunger, and human ambition might one day trouble heaven. For if the world is property, then every living person is born inside a claim. The Sumerians knew this in their bones. They lived beneath gods who required service, beneath skies that could withhold rain, beside rivers that could drown fields, and within cities that transformed devotion into work. In their sacred imagination, humanity had a purpose, but that purpose was not comfort, it was duty, and perhaps that is why their oldest stories feel so restless. Beneath the hymns and offerings, beneath the incense and polished vessels, beneath the great temple walls glowing in the desert light, there remains a question no ritual could entirely silence. What happens when the servants begin to understand the house? In the oldest chambers of Mesopotamian imagination, humanity does not appear as an accident. Humanity is made, not born from a dream of freedom, not raised up as the crowned master of nature, not placed gently in a garden for delight alone, but shaped for a purpose that is both sacred and unsettling. The human being enters the world as a solution to a divine problem. The gods have work to do, and the work has become too heavy. This idea moves through the ancient texts like a buried river. The Sumerian and later Mesopotamian traditions preserve several forms of the human creation story, each with its own sacred atmosphere, its own arrangement of divine names, its own rhythm of cause and consequence. Yet again and again, the same dark theme returns. Labour stands at the centre. The universe requires maintenance. Canals must be cleared, fields must be watered, food must be prepared, temples must be supplied. The divine household must continue, and someone must carry the basket. At first, in some tellings, the burden falls upon lesser gods. These beings dig waterways through the cosmic earth. They endure the weight of toil. Their hands ache. Their backs bend. Their complaint grows. They do not rebel out of wickedness, but from exhaustion. The myth understands something every labouring society understands. Work without end becomes a kind of prison, even when the workers are divine. In the silence before dawn, one can imagine them gathering at the edge of their task, their tools laid down, their anger rising like heat from baked clay. The canals stretch before them, the earth resists them. The higher gods require order. But order has a cost. A universe, no less than a city, must be maintained. The great powers may decree, but others must perform. Then comes the terrible invention. A new creature will be fashioned, one capable of work, obedience, reproduction, speech, ritual, and memory. This creature will be mortal, which means replaceable. It will hunger, which means it can be compelled. It will fear, which means it can be ruled. It will dream, which means it can be instructed by heaven and haunted by the unseen. It will die, which means its service is bounded, but its kind will continue. The clay of the earth becomes central to this vision. In the land of Sumer, clay was everywhere. It formed bricks, tablets, vessels, ceilings, toys, figurines, and foundations. It received writing. It hardened in fire. It dissolved in water. It was humble, common, useful, and transformable. To say that humans were made from clay was not a childish guess. It was a profound metaphor rooted in material life. Clay had no shape until pressed by hands. Clay could become a city wall or a cup, a tablet of law or a broken shard beneath a foot. Clay was the substance of civilization. So too was mankind. In some traditions, divine blood or divine essence is mixed with earth. This detail is haunting. It suggests that humans are not merely mud animated for service. Something of the gods is placed inside them, something dangerous, luminous, and difficult to govern. The worker contains a trace of the master. The mortal bears a spark of the immortal. The creature made to serve may also think, desire, grieve, remember, question, and create. Here lies the seed of conflict. If humans were fashioned only as tools, then why give them song if they were made only to carry burdens? Why give them language rich enough for lament if they were designed only to feed the gods? Why give them imagination, tenderness, rage, and the ability to carve meaning into clay? The myth answers one question and opens another. It explains labour, but it also reveals the anxiety of power. The servant is useful because he resembles the divine. The servant is dangerous for the same reason. The ancient scribes who copied these stories were not merely preserving entertainment. They were working inside a world of schools, temples, archives, and disciplined memory. A young scribe learned signs through repetition. He copied word lists, proverbs, hymns, myths, and model contracts. He pressed the wedge again and again into damp clay until his hand obeyed thought. The creation of humanity was therefore itself recopied by human hands, in human institutions, for human audiences who lived under divine claims. There's a strange beauty in this. Humans, said to be made for labour, became the record keepers of the gods. Their tablets preserved divine speech more faithfully than flesh could preserve royal blood. Kings vanished, empires fell, temples burned. But the clay worker remembered. The creation myths also reveal the importance of sound. The gods are troubled by noise, but humans are created through command, ritual speech, and divine decision. Speech makes worlds. Naming gives form. A being becomes real when placed inside language. The Sumerian world was alive with spoken power prayers recited at dawn, lamentations chanted in ruined sanctuaries, incantations whispered over the sick, oaths sworn before witnesses, royal inscriptions proclaimed to future generations. To be human was to speak beneath heaven, and perhaps to speak too much. The mortal servant was not made alone. Human society was imagined collectively. Men and women appear as part of the ongoing reproduction of labour, offering, and city life. The household becomes the small mirror of the temple estate. Children inherit debts, skills, gods, names, fears, and fields. The body itself becomes part of the sacred economy. Birth brings another pair of hands into a world already filled with obligations. Yet the myths are not merely grim. They also grant humans a recognised place in the cosmic order. To be made by the gods is to matter. To serve heaven is to stand in relation to heaven. The worker may be low, but he is not meaningless. The woman grinding grain, the brewer preparing beer, the farmer opening an irrigation gate, the singer lifting a hymn, the scribe recording sheep, all participate in the maintenance of the world. Life is burdened, but not empty. This is the brilliance and severity of the Mesopotamian vision. It does not flatter humanity. It does not pretend that work is always noble, or that suffering is easily explained. It says, instead, that civilization is founded upon transferred labour. The gods were relieved, and mankind bent beneath the load. The canal moved from divine hands to human hands. The basket changed shoulders. Radiocarbon dating can place ancient settlements within their centuries. Stratigraphic excavation can show the rise of temples and houses across generations. Lithic analysis can reveal older technologies lingering beneath the age of cities. Genomic data can trace movements of people across landscapes. But the creation myths give us another kind of evidence. They reveal how people felt the weight of being human. They felt made. They felt claimed. They felt useful to powers beyond themselves. And perhaps they felt, somewhere in the quiet chambers of thought, that usefulness was not the same as peace. The forgotten war between gods and humans begins in this act of making, not with armies, not with trumpets, not with fire falling from the stars, but with clay shaped for service, and filled with a force too restless to remain silent. A creature is formed to carry the divine burden, yet in its chest there awakens memory, hunger, grief, and wonder. From such material, obedience can be fashioned. So can rebellion. The first danger of humankind was not its weapon, it was its sound. In the ancient imagination of Mesopotamia, the world did not collapse because humans became mighty in the manner of later kings, marching with shields, bronze blades, and banners lifting in the hot wind. The first crisis was more intimate, more strange, and perhaps more frightening. Human beings multiplied, their settlements expanded, their work filled the day, their voices filled the night. The earth, once ordered by divine command, began to tremble with the noise of life. Noise is one of the most revealing details in the old stories. To modern minds it may seem almost small. How could sound threaten the gods? How could the cries of workers, children, animals, mourners, traders, singers, and labourers disturb the powers of heaven? Yet the ancient world understood sound as force. A spoken oath could bind a man. A curse could travel. A lament could summon pity. An incantation could drive out sickness. A royal inscription could command the future to remember. Speech was not empty air. It was a substance of order or disorder. So when myth says that mankind became too loud, it is not merely complaining about crowded streets. It is describing a universe in which the human presence has grown beyond its intended measure. Imagine the alluvial plain at night. The heat of the day still rises from mud walls. Dogs bark between houses. Infants cry in dark rooms. Donkeys stamp beside reed shelters. Men return late from irrigation work, their voices low with fatigue. Women grind grain before dawn, stone against stone, a rhythm older than writing. Beer jars are opened. Arguments break out in courtyards. Songs rise from feast rooms. Priests chant in the temple precinct. Somewhere a mourner wails for the dead, and the sound carries across flat roofs beneath a sky bright with stars. To the human ear, this is civilization. To the gods in the story, it becomes unrest. The theme of divine sleeplessness is extraordinary because it transforms human flourishing into a cosmic offense. The very success of humanity becomes intolerable. People were made to work, but work produces settlement. Settlement produces birth. Birth produces density. Density produces sound. The servant population begins to fill the earth with its own rhythms. The gods wanted labour, but they received society. This is the turning point where creation becomes anxiety. The ancient myths do not describe humans as purely evil. Their offence is not always rebellion in the heroic sense. They do not necessarily storm the heavens. They do not always curse their makers. They simply become too many, too present, too audible. Their existence exceeds administrative purpose. They cease to be only hands and backs. They become a multitude. Here the myth touches something profound in early urban life. Cities generate abundance, but also pressure. People crowded into neighbourhoods built of mud, brick and reed. Waste accumulated. Disease could spread. Labour had to be organised. Water had to be controlled. Disputes had to be judged. Grain had to be stored and guarded. Every success made the system more complex. Every canal required maintenance. Every harvest drew dependence. Every temple ration implied a ledger, an overseer, and a queue of hungry mouths. The Sumerian city was therefore a miracle that could easily feel like a burden. Its noise was not only physical, it was social. It was the hum of obligation, debt, hierarchy, ritual, hunger, and administration. The divine complaint may preserve, in mythic form, the experience of a world becoming crowded with human demands. Labour, too, had its own sound, the scrape of baskets, the slap of wet clay, the creak of wooden tools, the bleating of sheep counted into temple records, the dull crush of grain beneath grinding stones, the calls of foremen at canal banks, the chant of workers moving in rhythm to lift and haul, the crackle of kiln fire, the reed stylus pressing into tablet after tablet, making a dry, delicate music of control. In such a world, even silence belonged to power. The temple interior, dim and restricted, stood apart from the clamour of alleys and workshops. The god rested within carefully maintained space. The statue received order while the city outside produced disorder. Sacred quiet was not natural. It had to be manufactured by ritual, architecture, access, and fear. The myth of divine anger suggests that human life could violate this sacred quiet. There is a political edge here, sharp as a freshly cut reed. Rulers and priests have often feared the noise of people. The crowd is unpredictable. A murmuring population can become complaint. Complaint can become refusal. Refusal can become rebellion. The divine ear, disturbed by mankind, may also reflect the elite fear of uncontrolled human gathering. What begins as sound may become a demand. Mesopotamian texts often portray the divine assembly as capable of severe response, the gods deliberate. They consider measures to reduce humanity. Plague, famine, drought, and flood appear not merely as natural disasters, but as instruments of cosmic discipline. Such episodes express a terrifying world-view in which mass suffering can be interpreted as heavenly policy. The world is not indifferent. It is governed, and governance can be ruthless. Yet the stories also preserve dissent within heaven. Not all divine powers desire total destruction. Wisdom sometimes speaks against rage. A warning may be sent. A dream may carry secret knowledge. A single human may be taught how to survive. This tension within the divine realm is essential. It means the gods are not a single cold machine of punishment. They are divided, political, emotional, and uncertain. They argue over mankind because mankind matters. The human condition is caught between opposing divine moods. One god may demand silence, another may pity the living, one may send hunger, another may reveal grain, one may unleash water, another may instruct a man to build. The mortal world exists beneath this unstable counsel, never entirely secure, always dependent upon powers whose decisions are hidden. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. What did ancient listeners hear in these stories? Perhaps they heard an explanation for catastrophe. When disease entered a city and bodies were carried out through narrow streets, the myth gave disaster a voice. When fields failed and families waited for grain that did not come, the myth placed famine inside a cosmic argument. When floodwaters rose and swallowed walls, the myth transformed terror into judgment, warning, and memory. But perhaps they also heard something more personal. They heard that the gods noticed them. Even in anger, heaven was attentive. Human sound reached beyond the roofs of the city. Human existence could trouble the divine. There is a strange dignity in that terror. To be hated by gods is still to be visible to gods. The forgotten war between gods and humans is therefore not simply a clash of armies. It is a struggle over sound, scale, and presence. The gods make humans to relieve divine labour, but humans become a world. They generate songs, names, funerals, markets, births, arguments, prayers, and cries that cannot be reduced to service. They overflow the purpose assigned to them. A worker can be counted. A multitude cannot be so easily contained. The old tablets leave us answerless, adrift to ponder whether this myth remembers an age when human society first became too large for older sacred categories to hold. Perhaps the noise of mankind was the noise of civilization itself, rising from canals, granaries, houses, temples, and crowded streets. Perhaps divine anger was the shadow cast by human success. In the end, the gods heard the city, and the sound did not let them sleep. The gods of Mesopotamia did not rule alone. They gathered. In the sacred imagination of Sumer, the universe was not governed by one silent will moving through emptiness, but by a great assembly of powers, a council of divine beings whose decisions shaped the lives of mortals, the fates of cities, the swelling of rivers, the destiny of kings, and the terrifying rhythm of destruction and renewal. Heaven itself had politics. The unseen world contained voices, ranks, rivalries, offices, seniority, persuasion, anger, mercy, and command. This divine assembly is one of the most human and haunting features of ancient Mesopotamian thought. The gods could meet as rulers meet. They could debate as elders debate. They could issue decrees. They could assign destinies. They could bless a king or strip him of legitimacy. They could decide that a city should prosper, or that its walls should fall, its canals choke with mud, its temples be emptied, and its people scatter like birds before the storm. The fate of mankind was not imagined as a law of nature alone. It was also a verdict. At the head of this sacred order stood powers vast enough to frighten the mind. There was the high authority of the sky, distant and majestic. There was the lordship of air, storm, and command, whose decisions could shake the world. There were powers of deep wisdom and sweet water, associated with craft, cunning, creation, and hidden knowledge. There were fierce powers of love and battle, radiant and dangerous, capable of tenderness and devastation in the same breath. There were moon and sun, judges of night and day, measuring time and exposing secrets. The divine council did not belong to fantasy alone. It reflected the political habits of early cities. Sumerian communities knew assemblies. They knew councils of elders. They knew the importance of spoken deliberation. They knew that authority could be collective, ceremonial, and contested. The gods were imagined through the social forms that humans knew, but enlarged to cosmic intensity. Earthly politics became a mirror of heavenly order, and heavenly order became the justification of earthly politics. When the old stories describe the gods debating the fate of humankind, they do something more than tell myth. They dramatize the uncertainty at the heart of existence. Why does plague come? Why does drought seize the fields? Why does a city flourish for generations and then vanish beneath ash? Why does one child live and another die? The assembly gives these questions a stage. Somewhere beyond sight, the powers have spoken. Somewhere beyond hearing, a decision has been made. This does not make the universe gentle. It makes it intentional. The thought is almost unbearable. A disaster caused by blind chance is frightening. A disaster caused by divine decision is more frightening still. It means suffering has passed through counsel. It means famine may be an instrument, flood may be a sentence, and silence from heaven may be policy. The human being stands below, unable to attend the meeting where his fate is discussed, yet the divine assembly is not presented as perfectly united. This is where Mesopotamian myth becomes psychologically deep. The gods are divided. Some are weary of mankind. Some are offended by noise. Some desire harsh reduction. Others preserve pity. Wisdom may oppose wrath. A secret may escape the council chamber. A warning may be carried through a dream, a wall, a whisper, or an omen. The debate among the gods creates a narrow passage through which humanity can survive. In this divided heaven, human life depends on negotiation among powers greater than itself. The image is cinematic and severe. Imagine a storm forming over the Mesopotamian plain. The horizon darkens with a colour like bruised metal. Wind runs through the reed beds. The date palms bend. Dust lifts in twisting veils along the canal banks. In the city, doors are pulled shut. Animals grow restless. Priests look to the temple roof. The people do not see only weather. They see decision. Somewhere in the high realm, the assembly has turned its face toward earth. The council chamber of the gods may be imagined not as a room of stone, but as a sacred intensity where names become destinies. To decree a fate is to fasten it. A city marked for glory receives abundance. A city marked for ruin walks already beneath a shadow, even while its markets remain full and its singers still perform at evening. The Sumerians understood the cruelty of delayed knowledge. Humans discover fate only when it arrives. This view gave enormous weight to ritual specialists. If divine decisions governed earthly life, then omens mattered, dreams mattered, liver divination, celestial signs, abnormal births, eclipses, storms, and the behaviour of animals could all become messages from the unseen council. The world was covered in writing before human script was ever pressed into clay. The sky wrote in stars. The river wrote in floods. The body wrote in illness. The gods wrote everywhere, and trained interpreters sought to read. The scribe, the diviner, the priest, and the king all stood near this boundary between decision and consequence. Their authority rested partly on the belief that the gods could be approached, consulted, appeased, or understood. Offerings were not empty gestures. They were diplomatic acts. Hymns were not only praise, they were petitions shaped with beauty. Lamentations were not merely grief. They were attempts to move divine hearts. In the matter of mankind's offence, the assembly reveals the logic of sacred rule. Humans are not free agents wandering through a neutral world. They are subjects within a cosmic kingdom. Their numbers, their labour, their sound, their cities, their obedience, and their transgressions become matters of divine administration. The gods deliberate because humanity has become a public problem. The very idea chills the blood. For what defence can mortals offer in a court they cannot enter? What advocate speaks for the woman grinding grain at dawn? For the canal worker knee-deep in mud? For the child asleep beside a reed wall? For the old man watching salt creep over his field? Myth answers with complexity. Sometimes no advocate appears. Sometimes destruction comes. Sometimes wisdom bends the rules. Sometimes humanity survives not because it is innocent, but because one god refuses to let the human story end. The divine assembly also reflects a tension within power itself. Authority desires order, but life produces excess. A council can decree limits, yet fertility overflows. A king can count workers, but he cannot count every grief. A temple can measure grain, but not hunger. The gods can make humans for labour, but human beings produce noise, memory, mourning, love, and ambition. The council meets because creation has become unruly. This is the heart of the forgotten war. It is not only violence, it is administration turning against life. It is cosmic government trying to solve the problem of the living multitude. It is the fear that creation, once released, cannot be contained by the purpose assigned to it. The assembly of gods becomes both courtroom and war chamber, both temple and throne room, both council of order and council of dread. On earth, the people continue. They sow fields beneath uncertain skies. They carry offerings in temple courts. They pour beer for the gods. They watch smoke rise from altars. They listen to priests recite ancient words. They live under decisions they cannot hear, made by beings they cannot command. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made from the broken tablets and buried archives still lying under the Mesopotamian dust. A single fragment may yet sharpen the picture. A newly joined text may reveal another divine speech, another dissenting voice, another hint of how ancient minds understood the crisis between heaven and earth. But even now, the image remains powerful. The gods gathered. They spoke of mankind. And somewhere, beneath the wide and pitiless sky, human beings waited for the verdict. The weapons of heaven were not always made of metal. In the world of Sumerian thought, divine violence could arrive as storm, fever, hunger, madness, flood, infertility, invasion, or silence. It did not need the shape of a sword to cut through a city. It did not need wheels, chariots, helmets, or ranks of men moving beneath banners. The gods possessed older weapons, deeper weapons, forces woven into the fabric of the world itself. When heaven struck, earth could become the blade. This is why the forgotten war between gods and humans must be approached with caution. It is tempting to imagine a literal battlefield, with mortals on one side and shining divine warriors on the other. But ancient texts often speak in a language where natural disaster, political collapse, ritual failure, and sacred punishment overlap. A city destroyed by enemy soldiers might be described as abandoned by its god. A drought might be remembered as divine anger. A plague might become an invisible army. A flood might be judgment made liquid. The question is not whether the ancients confuse reality with myth. That is too simple. The deeper question is how they understood reality itself. For the Sumerians, the world was not divided into the purely natural and the purely supernatural. Rain, disease, fertility, dream, omen, victory, and defeat belonged to one charged universe. A storm was weather, but it was also will. A famine was ecological failure, but also moral and ritual crisis. A conquering army was human, but it might also be the instrument of a god. The weapon and the meaning could not be separated. Consider the storm. On the Mesopotamian plain, weather could appear with terrifying suddenness. A dark front might rise over a flat horizon. Wind could drive dust through streets and courtyards until day turned brown. Thunder rolled over mud brick roofs. Rain, when fierce, could dissolve walls, flood storage pits, spoil grain, and turn alleys into channels of filth. Lightning tore open the sky with a brightness that felt like judgment. To a people whose buildings were made of earth, whose fields depended on water, whose lives required balance between flood and drought, the storm was never merely dramatic. It was power descending. A storm god did not need to stand visibly in the street. His presence was known by impact. Then there was hunger. No weapon is more patient. Hunger enters slowly. It begins with poor water, weak harvests, damaged canals, failed storage, insects, disease among animals, or disruption of trade. It settles first in the poor, then rises through the household. Beer thins. Bread shrinks, parents count jars, seed grain becomes food, and the future is eaten to survive the present. In such conditions, bodies become records of catastrophe. A god who sends famine does not have to kill at once. He only closes the hand of abundance. Archaeology can trace such pressures in indirect ways. Settlement patterns shift, irrigation systems change, salinity damages fields. Storage facilities expand or contract. Human remains may reveal stress, disease, or nutritional hardship. Layers of abandonment appear where life once pressed densely into streets. Yet the texts transform these pressures into experience. They show us how disaster felt from within a sacred cosmos. To suffer hunger was not only to endure scarcity, it was to ask who had withdrawn favour Plague, too, was a weapon of invisible terror. The ancient city, with its density, animals, waste, water channels, and movement of people, created conditions where illness could spread quickly. The Sumerians did not know microbes as modern science understands them, but they knew contagion, fever, wasting, sudden death, and the dread of unseen approach. Disease moved like a messenger from a realm beyond sight. It crossed thresholds. It entered the bedchamber. It touched the strong and the weak. It mocked walls and locks. In mythic language, plague could be divine judgment. In lived experience, it was also chaos within the body. The person became a battlefield, flesh against an enemy without face. War itself remained one of heaven's most terrible earthly instruments. Cities fought cities. Kings raised armies. Boundaries shifted. Temples were plundered. Statues of gods could be carried away as trophies. A political and spiritual catastrophe deeper than the loss of gold. To remove a god's image from a city was to wound the city's heart. A defeated people might believe that their protector had been captured, offended, or had chosen to leave. Military defeat therefore became theological trauma. The sword in a soldier's hand could become the weapon of heaven. This makes the idea of war between gods and humans more complex. Humans fought each other, but often under divine names. A king did not merely conquer for appetite or strategy. He claimed command, favour, destiny, and sacred duty. His inscriptions might declare that a god strengthened his arm, opened the road, shattered enemies, or granted the lands into his hand. Human violence became sanctified. Divine violence became humanized. The battlefield lay between cities, but the explanation rose into heaven. Material culture helps us see how deeply this vision shaped society. Weapons found in graves and ruins reveal the growing organization of conflict spearheads, axes, daggers, sling stones, helmets, and later military equipment tied to more complex states. Seal imagery shows combat, heroic struggle, captives, and animals under control. Fortification walls speak of fear made architectural, yet these objects are more than military tools. They belong to a mental world in which protection, power, kingship, and divine favour were fused. The gods also had symbolic weapons: the measuring rod, the tablet of destinies, the shining radiance of divine authority, the net that captures enemies, the word of decree that fixes fate. These are not weapons in the ordinary sense, yet they may be more frightening than spears. A spear kills a body. A decree can condemn a city, a lineage, a generation. In Mesopotamian imagination, speech from the divine assembly had force. To pronounce was to act. To name a fate was to begin its fulfillment. Here, violence becomes administrative. A god does not need to rage like a warrior. He can assign, he can withdraw, he can refuse, he can let canals fail, kings falter, enemies approach, wombs close, and storehouses empty. In such a world, the absence of blessing is itself an attack. Ritual sought to resist these weapons. Offerings fed divine households. Laments softened wrath. Incantations confronted demons and sickness. Omens warned of danger. Purification rites restored boundaries. Temple rebuilding repaired the relationship between city and god. The ancient people did not merely submit. They answered with action. Their defense was ceremony, memory, obedience, divination, and craft. Still, their defences were uncertain. A hymn could rise beautifully and still famine might come. A king could rebuild a sanctuary and still lose a battle. A diviner could read the liver of a sacrificed animal and still misunderstand the future. The world remained unstable, and this instability gave myth its dark power. Was the war literal? Perhaps in part, for cities burned and armies marched beneath divine claims. Was it symbolic? Certainly, for the struggle expressed the tension between human growth and cosmic authority. Was it ecological? Often, for drought, flood, and soil exhaustion could feel like wrath. Was it ritual deeply? For every offering implied a fragile peace between heaven and earth. The weapons of heaven and earth were therefore many, and the most terrible were those that made ordinary life turn against itself. Water, needed for crops, could drown. Sun, needed for growth, could scorch. Kings, needed for order, could devour. Cities, built for protection, could become traps. Labour, given meaning by service, could become bondage. Even human sound, sign of life, could become an offence. The old tablets leave us answerless, adrift to ponder whether myth remembers real disasters, social conflicts, or the first great anxieties of urban civilization. The evidence does not flatten into one explanation. It remains layered, like the mounds themselves. But the vision endures. The gods didn't always descend with visible armies. They armed the world. Water was the oldest blessing and the oldest terror. In the lands of Sumer, life gathered where water could be persuaded to remain. The rivers carried fertility through a country that otherwise leaned toward thirst, glare, dust, and salt. Their channels fed fields of barley. Their marshes sheltered fish, birds, reeds, and wild creatures. Their banks became roads of movement, corridors of trade, and boundaries between settled order and the uncertain spaces beyond. Without water, the city starved. With too much water, the city disappeared. This double nature of water shaped the Mesopotamian soul. The flood story is therefore not merely a tale of punishment. It is a memory clothed in cosmic fear. It is the river, so often coaxed through canals and gates, suddenly freed from human management. It is irrigation reversed into catastrophe. It is the sacred gift turned into a weapon. It is the battlefield of the gods made liquid. In the great deluge traditions of Mesopotamia, the divine powers decide that humanity must be destroyed. The reasons vary across tellings, but the emotional structure is clear. Mankind has become unbearable to heaven. The divine assembly has judged the human multitude. The chosen instrument is not fire, not plague alone, not sword, but overwhelming water. The world that sustained human settlement becomes the means of its undoing. Imagine the first signs. The air grows heavy, birds move strangely over the reed beds, the horizon darkens. A wind begins to push across the plain, first as breath, then as command. Clouds mass in a sky usually pitiless with light. Distant thunder moves like carts over bronze. In the city, workers look up from brick moulds and grain jars. Priests watch from temple platforms. Mothers draw children indoors. The smell of wet dust rises as the first drops strike the earth. Then the rain does not stop. Canals swell beyond their banks. Ditches vanish. Field boundaries blur. The carefully measured world loses its lines. Mud brick walls drink water until they weaken. Courtyards become pools. Storehouses leak. Animals panic. Boats tear from their moorings. The river, once divided and disciplined by human effort, spreads into alleys, rooms, shrines, and sleeping places. A city made from earth begins returning to earth. In such an image, the war between gods and humans reaches one of its most devastating forms. There is no battle cry from mankind. There is no shield wall against the clouds. There is only the terrible helplessness of bodies before floodwater. Human civilization, with all its tablets, granaries, temples, and laws, is revealed as fragile against a force older than writing. And yet, at the heart of the flood tradition, destruction is not complete. A warning is given. This is one of the most important details in the entire ancient imagination. The divine world is divided. Some power, often associated with wisdom, craft, or deep water, refuses to let the human story vanish utterly. The warning may come indirectly, through dream, through wall, through secret speech shaped so that divine command is technically obeyed and merciful resistance still occurs. The chosen survivor is told to build, not to fight, not to argue before the council, not to raise a city wall, to build a vessel. The command is strange and practical. A human survives divine violence through craft. He measured, he gathers, he seals, he stores, he prepares wood, reeds, bitumen, rope, food, animals, family, and memory are drawn together into one floating refuge. The ark, boat, or great vessel becomes a miniature world, a fragile container of continuity moving upon the waters of judgment. It is not a palace. It is not a temple in the normal sense. Yet for the duration of the flood, it holds the future of creation. Here the myth honours human skill. The gods may command the waters, but man can build, man can listen, man can prepare, man can preserve life through technique, obedience, and endurance. The same creature made to carry labour now uses labour to survive heaven's wrath. The worker becomes the keeper. The flood erases ordinary distinctions. City and field vanish beneath the same surface. Rich and poor face the same water. Walls, roads, boundaries, and property lines are dissolved. The world is reduced to movement, darkness, rain, and breath. In this sense, the deluge is not only punishment, it is unmaking. Creation is being returned to the watery beginning. Ancient Mesopotamia knew the terror of inundation not as fantasy, but as environmental possibility. Excavations at several early sites have revealed flood deposits. Though scholars debate their date, scale, and relation to later stories, no single layer can simply be declared the universal flood of myth. The evidence is more complex, more local, and more layered, but this is precisely how memory often works. Real floods, river shifts, ruined settlements, and inherited stories may have merged over centuries into a cosmic narrative of divine judgment. Radiocarbon dating can help place organic remains associated with flood levels. Stratigraphic excavation can distinguish layers of silt from occupation surfaces, ash deposits, and rebuilding phases. Ceramic sequences can show whether communities returned or vanished. The archaeologist asks where the water came from, how far it spread, how long the site was abandoned, and what changed when people rebuilt. The myth asks a different question. Why would the gods drown the world? Both questions matter. The flood as divine battlefield also reveals the limits of kingship. No ruler commands the deluge. No army halts it. No tax system can organize it into submission. Even the temple, house of the god, may stand helpless if the god has chosen devastation. The sacred center itself can be overwhelmed. In that moment, all human institutions are humbled before a power that does not negotiate in ordinary language. Yet when the waters retreat, the story does not end in emptiness. The vessel comes to rest, a survivor emerges, offerings are made, smoke rises into the cleansed air, the gods gather to the scent, and this image is deeply revealing. The divine powers, who sought to destroy mankind, are drawn again to human ritual. They need the relationship they tried to sever. The offering reopens the bond between heaven and earth, the servant survives, and the masters remember their dependents. This is the paradox at the heart of the deluge. The gods resent human noise, but they require human worship. They punish mankind. Yet human offerings sustain divine order. They unleash waters to silence the earth, yet they gather when a human hand kindles sacrifice. Destruction reveals dependence. The settlement after the flood is therefore uneasy. Humanity is permitted to continue, but not innocently. Limits may be imposed. Mortality remains. The human condition is narrowed by fear. The memory of divine judgment becomes part of civilization's foundation. Every city rebuilt after catastrophe carries within it the knowledge that the world can be erased. For ancient listeners, the flood story may have held many meanings at once. It explained the destructive power of rivers. It warned against offending divine order. It justified ritual obedience. It preserved memories of real environmental trauma. It reflected anxiety about population, noise, and urban expansion. It gave hope that wisdom and craft could survive catastrophe. It insisted that even when the gods rage, mercy may hide within the storm. Still, secrets remain hidden. Perhaps beneath unexplored mounds there are flood layers not yet studied. Perhaps in museum storerooms, broken tablets wait for a new join that will sharpen the ancient account. Perhaps future genomic data, landscape archaeology, and sediment analysis will reveal movements of people after environmental disruption across the southern plain. Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made, but the image already burns itself into memory. A dark sky over the Euphrates, rain without mercy, water climbing the walls, clay tablets dissolving in rooms where no one returns, a vessel sealed against death, animals breathing in darkness, a human survivor listening to the storm strike the roof, knowing that the gods have made the world their battlefield. And when the waters at last grow still, the silence is not peace, it is survival. The first kings did not stand outside the sacred order. They stood inside it, beneath it, and dangerously near its flame. In the cities of Sumer, power did not appear as a simple human invention. Authority had to descend. It had to be granted, recognized, ritually confirmed, and written into the pattern of the cosmos. A ruler might command soldiers, organize labor, judge disputes, build walls, and manage canals, but his strength alone was never enough. He required favor from above. Without the gods, kingship became only force. With the gods, force became destiny. This is why the Sumerian king is one of the most fascinating figures in early history. He is neither fully divine in the simple sense, nor merely political in the modern sense. He is a mediator, a servant, a builder, a shepherd, a warrior, a caretaker of temples, and a human body carrying a burden too large for ordinary flesh. He stands between gods and men, translating divine command into earthly administration. The city belonged to the god. The king governed within that claim. His first duty was not conquest, though conquest would come. It was maintenance. He restored temples. He repaired canals. He protected fields. He offered gifts. He sponsored festivals. He dedicated statues. He commissioned inscriptions that spoke to the gods and to future generations. He made visible the relationship between heaven and earth. When a king built well, irrigated well, judged well, and worshipped well, he could present himself as the one through whom divine order flowed into the city. The title of shepherd appears again and again in Mesopotamian royal thought, and it is not accidental. A shepherd guides, feeds, protects, counts, and disciplines. He does not create the flock, yet he is responsible for its survival. The metaphor is tender and controlling at the same time. The people are cared for, but they are also managed. The king watches over them, and in watching, he claims the right to direct their movement. The temple and palace were not always identical, but their interests were deeply intertwined. Both required grain, both required workers, both required scribes. Both depended on storage, measurement, and obedience. The rise of kingship did not erase the sacred economy, it intensified it, expanded it, and gave it new forms of command. A canal project could be both practical and holy. A wall could defend a city and glorify a god. A military campaign could bring booty to a temple and fame to a king. In this world, administration became a sacred art. The clay tablet was one of kingship's quiet weapons. On its surface, workers became entries, fields became measured plots, animals became totals, beer and bread became ration lists. The stylus did not shout, but it fixed obligation. It allowed institutions to remember debts, deliveries, names, and days. A man could argue with another man, but it was harder to argue with a tablet stored in an archive. The scribe, therefore, often stood close to power. He did not swing the axe or pull the plough, yet he shaped the world of those who did. He transformed speech into record. He made the command portable. He preserved the decision after the voice had faded. In a society where the gods themselves were imagined as assigning fates, human record-keeping took on an almost cosmic character. To write was to bind. Kingship also reshaped the meaning of war. A ruler who marched against a neighbouring city did not present himself merely as ambitious. He could claim that the god had commanded him, that justice required action, that disorder had to be corrected, that enemies had offended the divine order. Thus human conflict was lifted into sacred language. The spear became an instrument of heaven. The captive became proof of favour. The defeated city became evidence that its god had withdrawn, or that a greater divine plan had prevailed. This is where the forgotten conflict between gods and humans becomes politically dangerous. If the gods own the world and the king acts for the gods, then resistance to the king can be framed as resistance to heaven. A labourer refusing service is not merely tired. A city resisting tribute is not merely independent. A rival ruler is not merely a competitor. All can be placed within a drama of obedience and rebellion, yet the texts also reveal unease. Kings boast, but they also pray. They claim greatness, but they fear divine anger. They build monuments, but they know monuments crumble. They present themselves as chosen, but choice can be withdrawn. No king is secure forever. His body ages, his enemies gather, his heirs quarrel, his canals silt, his fields salt. His gods may grow silent. This vulnerability made royal ritual essential. The king had to continually renew his bond with the divine. He entered temples with offerings. He received symbols of office. He participated in ceremonies that placed his rule inside sacred time. The public display mattered. People had to see the relationship. They had to hear the hymns, watch the processions, smell the incense, and feel that the city remained connected to powers beyond human weakness. A great festival could transform the city into a theatre of cosmic order. Streets were prepared, statues moved, musicians played, priests chanted, offerings accumulated, crowds gathered in awe, fear, hope, and curiosity. For a moment, the invisible hierarchy became visible. The god emerged from the hidden chamber. The king bowed. The people watched. Power moved through ritual like water through a canal. But beneath this beauty lay the weight of labour. Someone brewed the beer. Someone slaughtered the animals. Someone swept the courtyards. Someone carried baskets of grain. Someone cut reeds, moulded bricks, hauled timber, shaped metal, and copied accounts. Sacred splendour rested upon human backs. The king between gods and men was also the organiser of this burden. His glory was built from the work of thousands whose names may survive only as marks on administrative clay. To judge this world too quickly would be a mistake. The Sumerians did not simply invent oppression and call it holy. They faced real problems of survival, water control, food storage, defence, trade, dispute settlement, and disaster response. Large communities require coordination. The sacred king offered a solution. He gave society a centre, a voice, and a visible bond with the divine. But every solution creates a new danger. When one man stands between heaven and earth, he may protect the people from chaos, or he may become chaos wearing a crown. When divine favour justifies command, injustice can speak in a sacred accent. When labour serves the gods through the king, exhaustion may be praised as duty. The mythic creation of humans as workers finds its earthly machinery in the rise of temple and palace power. Still, the people were not voiceless shadows. They sang, traded, petitioned, sued, inherited, mourned, celebrated, and remembered. They moved through systems of authority with intelligence and endurance. They knew the king was mighty, but also mortal. They knew the god was hidden, but the temple roof could leak. They knew power claimed eternity, yet every city carried ruins beneath its own streets. The Sumerian king stood at the centre of this contradiction. He was the servant of the gods and master of men. He bowed upward and commanded downward. He built temples to prove humility and inscriptions to preserve fame. He promised order in a world where order was always temporary. In him, the ancient struggle found a human face. The gods may have owned the earth, but kings collected its grain. The gods may have decreed destiny, but kings sent workers to the canals. The gods may have demanded offerings, but kings organized the hands that prepared them. Between heaven's hunger and mankind's exhaustion stood the ruler, crowned by sacred favor, shadowed by fear, and remembered in clay. Rebellion does not always begin with a shout. Sometimes it begins as a record, a name pressed into clay, a ration reduced, a field reassigned, a debt extended, a work crew counted, a temple account corrected by a tired scribe in the dim light of an administrative room. In Sumer, resistance and obedience both passed through the same fragile medium. The clay tablet could preserve the voice of authority, but it could also preserve the pressure beneath authority, the quiet evidence of a society negotiating with its own weight. The ancient texts do not give us a simple human uprising against the gods, complete with banners, speeches, and battle lines drawn across the plain. They give us something stranger and more truthful. They give us myths of divine labourers refusing their burden. They give us humans created to replace them. They give us stories of mankind becoming too numerous, too loud, too troublesome. They give us floods, punishments, warnings, and renewed arrangements. They give us royal inscriptions where kings insist that order has been restored, which often means disorder was near enough to frighten them. Rebellion, in this world, may have been remembered as cosmic disturbance. To understand this, we must look at the material life beneath the myth. Archaeology does not find rebellion as neatly as it finds a wall, a grave, or a storage jar. A revolt rarely leaves a label. It leaves burned layers, abandoned buildings, sudden changes in settlement, weapons in unusual contexts, smashed statues, interrupted construction, bodies without proper burial, or administrative gaps where records cease. Even these signs are ambiguous. Fire may come from war, accident, ritual clearing, or domestic disaster. Abandonment may follow drought, disease, political collapse, or river change. The archaeologist moves carefully, refusing certainty where the soil gives only hints. Still, patterns matter. In the great cities of southern Mesopotamia, the intensification of labour must have transformed human experience. Canal systems required maintenance, fields required coordinated irrigation, temples and palaces required supplies, textile production, brewing, animal management, brick making, and long-distance trade created webs of dependence. The more complex the city became, the more it needed administrators. The more it needed administrators, the more human life became measurable. A measured life can be protected. It can also be controlled. Clay tablets list workers, rations, deliveries, animals, tools, and land. They show an astonishing capacity for organisation. They also show the emergence of institutions that could see people through categories. A woman at a loom might appear as a ration recipient. A man at a canal might appear as a labour obligation. A child might enter the record as a dependent. The tablet does not hate them. It simply reduces them to what the institution needs to know. This is where the mythic language of human service becomes socially sharp. If mankind was made to carry the burden of the gods, then every ration list becomes part of a sacred story. Every work assignment echoes the creation myth. Every temple storehouse confirms that divine households consumed human labour. To question the burden was not merely to question an overseer, it was to question the order of the world. But humans do question. They always have. They question with words, with delays, with theft, with flight, with satire, with lawsuits, with secret songs, with broken tools, with silence, with migration, with refusal to appear when summoned. The clay archives of Mesopotamia preserve a world full of contracts, disputes, obligations, and corrections because society was not smooth. It had friction. Law exists because conflict exists. Records multiply because trust alone is insufficient. The rebellion written in clay is therefore not one event. It is the evidence of tension built into civilization itself. Lithic analysis helps us look deeper into the long human past beneath the cities. Stone tools from earlier periods remind us that the people of Mesopotamia did not emerge suddenly as urban subjects. Their ancestors hunted, gathered, fished, herded, farmed, and experimented across changing environments for thousands of years. The rise of cities was not the birth of intelligence, but the reorganization of intelligent people into new systems of labour and authority. The men and women who became temple workers and royal dependents carried within them older human capacities for autonomy, adaptation, memory, and movement. Genomic data adds another dimension. Populations in ancient Mesopotamia were not sealed inside a single unmoving identity. People moved, families mixed, traders travelled, captives were relocated, workers may have been drawn from different communities. Cities gathered bodies and lineages from wider landscapes. Such diversity could enrich urban life, but it could also create tension. A city is not only a settlement, it is a compression of many histories into one administrative space. The myth of mankind becoming too numerous may reflect more than population growth. It may express the anxiety of a world in which human complexity escaped older categories. More people meant more labour, but also more voices, more needs, more disputes, more memories, more gods in household practice, more chances for disorder. The city wanted people, yet feared the multitude it required. The divine rebellion of lesser gods is equally revealing. In some traditions, it is not humans who first resist labour, but gods themselves. They dig, suffer, complain, and finally refuse. This is a radical memory. It says that even divine beings can reach the limit of endurance. If gods may rebel against unbearable work, what does that imply about humans, who inherit the same burden in weaker bodies? The myth transfers labour downward, but it also transfers the possibility of complaint. A worker listening to such a story might hear obedience. He might hear that labour is his ordained place, but he might also hear that toil was once rejected by beings greater than himself. The story disciplines and destabilizes at the same time. It tells him why he must work, while admitting that endless work is grievous enough to provoke revolt. This is the paradox hidden in the clay. Power tells stories to justify itself, but stories are dangerous. Once spoken, they can be heard in more than one way. A myth meant to explain service can reveal injustice. A hymn praising a king can remind listeners that the king must be righteous. A lament over a destroyed city can preserve the memory that divine favour is not guaranteed to rulers forever. Writing fixes authority, but it also preserves the evidence by which authority may one day be judged. The Sumerians understood complaint as a sacred form. Laments are among the most powerful works of Mesopotamian literature. Cities speak as though they are widows. Temples mourn their abandonment. People cry out to gods who have allowed destruction. These are not rebellions in the military sense, but they are not silent obedience either. They give grief a public voice. They dare to describe suffering before heaven. In that act, humanity becomes more than a servant. It becomes witness. The forgotten war between gods and humans may be most visible here, not in swords raised against the sky, but in testimony. Humans record the terms of their burden. They preserve the memory of divine anger, royal command, institutional hunger, and mortal endurance. They write themselves into the story that once reduced them to labour. They become the keepers of the very myths that explain their subordination. There is something quietly defiant in this. A clay tablet is small enough to hold in the hand. It can be dropped, buried, broken, fired, lost, and found. Yet it can outlive the king who ordered it, the priest who stored it, the god statue that stood in the sanctuary, and the empire that claimed the plain. The hand of the servant, trained by the institution, becomes the hand that preserves the truth of the institution's world. Rebellion written in clay is not always a call to overthrow. It is the survival of memory against erasure. It is the refusal of human experience to vanish completely into divine command and royal accounting. It is the mark left by those who laboured, feared, prayed, complained, rebuilt, and endured. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. Many tablets are broken beyond easy reading. Many archives were scattered long ago. Many voices never reached writing at all. The poorest, the enslaved, the foreign captive, the exhausted field worker, the woman whose hands bled at the loom, often appear only through institutional records written by others. Their inner worlds are dim, but not absent. They are there in the rations, the labour lists, the legal disputes, the burials, the worn tools, the rebuilt houses, the silence between lines. And from those silences rises a question. Was mankind at war with the gods, or with the human systems that claim to serve them? The answer may not divide cleanly. In Sumerian, heaven and institution were woven together. To resist labour could mean resisting a temple. To resist a temple could mean offending a god. To suffer under a king could mean suffering beneath a sacred order. The war was therefore both cosmic and social, both mythic and material, both written in divine stories and pressed into the daily records of grain, beer, wool, and work. The clay does not shout. It endures, and in its endurance, it tells us that the first cities were not only monuments of human genius, they were also arenas of pressure, negotiation, obedience, and unrest. Within them, the servants of the gods learned to count, to remember, to lament, and to leave marks that time could not fully erase. Akkad rose like a storm over the old cities. Its coming changed the shape of Mesopotamian memory. The world of independent Sumerian city-states, each proud beneath the gaze of its own divine patron, did not vanish in a single breath. Yet a new force entered the plain with frightening clarity. Kingship expanded beyond the city wall. Authority no longer wished merely to govern fields, temples, canals, and neighbouring settlements. It wished to gather the lands beneath one name, one dynasty, one imperial command. The age of Akkad gave Mesopotamia a new political imagination. Its rulers were remembered not simply as local shepherds appointed by gods, but as conquerors of wide horizons. They moved through the ancient landscape with armies, scribes, governors, tribute systems, and royal inscriptions that stretched ambition into theology. The king was no longer only the caretaker of a sacred city. He became the chosen weapon of divine will, the one whose hand reached across mountains, rivers, trade routes, and hostile lands. Power grew taller, its shadow grew colder. The figure of Sargon stands at the doorway of this transformation. Later tradition wrapped him in legend, making his origins mysterious and his rise astonishing, as if empire itself needed a birth story worthy of myth. Whether every detail preserved about him is historical in the modern sense matters less than the force of the memory. Sargon became the image of royal ascent, the man lifted from obscurity into world command, favoured by gods, feared by enemies, and used by later kings as a model of impossible reach. Under Akkadian power, the older Sumerian cities did not simply cease to exist. They were incorporated, managed, resisted, honoured, and constrained. Temples continued, local traditions continued, scribes continued to write in Sumerian and Akkadian. The sacred geography remained powerful, but imperial rule placed a new frame around it. The city was no longer the largest imaginable container of destiny. Empire had arrived, and with it came a new scale of fear. An empire requires more than victory. It requires memory. It must remember tribute, land, governors, roots, labour, soldiers, grain, silver, captives, alliances, and disobedience. It must transform distance into administration. It must turn conquered places into readable places. It must make the mountains report to the plain, the frontier report to the capital, the local ruler report to the imperial king. The clay tablet became even more essential. The road, the seal, the messenger, and the archive became the nerves of power. Yet the larger the system, the more fragile its order. An empire can conquer faster than it can understand. It can demand from landscapes whose rhythms it does not fully control. It can impose authority on communities whose loyalty is thin. It can glorify the king as universal while depending on harvests, weather, transport, and obedience that may fail without warning. The greater the claim, the greater the humiliation when the claim collapses. In Mesopotamian thought, imperial success and divine favour were inseparable. A king who conquered could proclaim that the gods had opened the way. His enemies were not merely defeated, they were placed beneath a cosmic verdict. But this logic carried a dangerous reversal. If victory proved favour, then disaster raised a terrible question. Had the gods turned away? Akkad's fall became one of the most powerful examples of divine punishment in ancient Near Eastern imagination. Later, literature remembers the collapse not merely as politics, but as curse. The empire that once stood high is shown as broken beneath divine anger. The land is disturbed, temples are offended, the gods withdraw their protection, enemies descend, famine spreads, roads become unsafe, fields fail. The once mighty city becomes a warning. This is not neutral history. It is history transformed into moral and sacred drama. The curse tradition is haunting because it turns imperial collapse into judgment. Akkad does not simply lose control, it is condemned. The fall becomes a lesson about arrogance, sacrilege, and the danger of royal overreach. A king who stretches his hand too far toward the sacred may discover that conquest has limits. The gods who grant power can also unmake it.